Hi, my name is Michael Green. I'm the program manager for Azure Policies guest configuration feature, and I'd like to guide you through this document. Before you even get started, if you haven't read this page, which is also linked over here, Understand Azure Policies Guest Configuration, that's the best place to start. But if you've already gone through that and you're looking for more details, you'll see here at the very top, I again reference, make sure your prerequisites are in place and understanding the version of the extension that's there. And also, since this page is mostly focused on deploy if not exist policies, just mentioning again that that's currently in public preview. So let's talk about how remediation is handled both through Azure Policy and guest configuration. The module, the authoring module, if you're creating your own policies, is going to handle putting all this in place for you. This page is just to help you understand exactly what you're seeing as the output of that module. So the first thing you'll see is guest configuration assignments have a property named assignment types. Those properties are documented, by the way, over here under Azure Policies Guest Configuration Assignment Resources. So assignment type, you can set it to audit, which is read-only, apply and monitor, which applies the configuration but then lets the machine drift, and then apply and autocorrect. And we're going to talk about each of those scenarios in depth. Let's start with what we're calling remediation on demand, and that's apply and monitor. In this case, if you apply a policy, you leave everything at default, and you set everything to just, it's fine the way it is, apply and monitor, deploy if not exists, then you assign that policy to a scope of machines. First, those machines are going to get audited, and you're going to see results coming back in the portal for that policy. And you'll know, hey, this machine's already in the right state, nothing to do there. And then these machines are not configured correctly. And you can use remediation tests to trigger applying the configuration. And then after it's applied, if the machine drifts, it's going to return to being non-compliant, but it won't automatically do anything unless you do something to trigger that remediation task. That second point's super important, and we're going to talk about that in much more detail as we get further along in this page. So just pin that one for now. The second scenario here is continuous remediation. So again, you apply the policy, audit results come back, you see these are fine, but there's some machines that are not compliant, so you trigger making them compliant. And if autocorrect, if apply and autocorrect is the assignment type, what'll actually happen then is from that point forward, it's set to continuous remediation, meaning every 15 minutes, if the machine has drifted, it's just going to bring it back. The status will always report compliance. It does not report when an autocorrect was triggered. That's been in our backlog for a while. It's still important. It was a carryover into the new feature sets. It is something we're looking at. So if that's important to you, just keep in mind that we consider that to be important also. But that's the way it's currently working in public preview. It'll just always show compliant. The only exception would be if an error occurs when the set method is called to put the machine in the right status. If something goes wrong, it'll report not compliant, and the compliance reason will be the error message. And then the third scenario here is you don't want to remediate. You just want to audit. So that is also managed as you're using the authoring module and you set your type to just audit, then the policy will make sure that the guest configuration assignment that's created is also just set to audit. And then one more thing before we go on to how enforcement works. There is a tag available, and this would typically be something you would see where you've got multiple teams all working together, and there's a check and a balance situation. And maybe also like you have a certain role like a domain controller, and you just want to make sure that custom code is never run on something like that. So there's actually a machine tag that works both for Arc and for Azure Virtual Machines, custom guest configuration set policy. As you see it here on the page. So no spaces and those capital letters with a value of disabled. What the impact of that will be that the machine will only run set for packages that were signed by Microsoft. Built-in content will still work, but for any custom code, it'll automatically just be like basically if it tries to run set, it'll return an error message. Okay, let's talk about Azure Policy Enforcement. So this is super important to understand as you're thinking about your strategy for machine remediation. The first thing to consider is the enforcement mode. You'll see this on the very first page whenever you're in the Azure Policy portal and you create a new policy. The very bottom, there's a little slider. Do you want enforcement mode enabled or disabled? That's also a property if you're checking in the policy assignment from code is enforcement mode. When it's set to enabled, remediation tasks will be run automatically on create and on update operations. Most people think about this as, okay, well, this means whenever I deploy new machines, they're automatically going to get remediated. But existing machines, first I'll see audit results, and then whenever I run the remediation task, it will deploy the configuration. That's true, but keep in mind, it also gets triggered on an update operation. So that could be something like attaching a data disk or changing a network adapter or even adding a tag or changing the value of a tag of the virtual machine. So because of that, I just wanted to call that out. We've talked to people about this. Some people feel like that is the behavior they want. Sorry. And other people said, no, that would be an unexpected behavior. And so it's important that this gets documented and people are aware of it. And it's definitely, it's like some people just want the machines to work their way towards compliance. And this was the favored scenario. But if you don't want that, it's okay to set it to disabled. What will happen is new machines that get deployed, if they're not compliant, they're just going to get built and return not compliant as their status. And then you will control when the remediation tasks are run. And if enforcement is set to disabled, they will only run when you manually trigger them. And that will give you total control. Like if you only want changes to happen during maintenance windows, for an example, then that's how you would orchestrate that. There's also an option at the time of assignment on that tab that says remediate. You'll see create a remediation task. This is really helpful because in that scenario where, like, I would not use this if I was assigning to a big scope, like the whole subscription or maybe even a whole resource group. It's going to go remediate all of the existing machines. But let's say that you're going, like maybe you know it's a safe release, or maybe you're going to test machines and you just want to minimize the number of steps you have to take to get a configuration to those test machines. There's a checkbox, create a remediation task, which means when that policy assignment is created, go ahead and trigger remediation on any non-compliant machines. So you can make it behave a little bit more like group policy or SCCM, where when you assigned it, it just went and never asked you any questions. That would be how you do it, by telling it to create a remediation task as the policy assignment is created. But again, make sure you do that safely. And then finally, you can trigger remediation outside of Azure Policy, completely outside of even remediation tasks. And so basically what you would do is, let's say that you are working completely outside of policy. You've got an ARM template with a machine and your guest assignment, so it's all part of the same deployment. You deploy it, you use apply and monitor, and then it drifts. If you just use that same template and redeploy, or maybe you take the section for the guest assignment and just redeploy the guest assignment, that put operation against the guest assignment resource is going to change the status, and you won't even see it happen because like, unless you had a tool that was just constantly polling, you probably won't even see it happen. But that compliance status will shift to pending. And you can also look out for things like if you change the parameters, making sure the parameter hash was updated, you'll see that as well. But the agent picks up on these things and it treats that as, oh, I have new work to do. Either my status went back to pending because nothing changed, but there was a new put operation, or something like my parameters have changed for this configuration. And so in that case, the agents will reapply the configuration and then just keep using the mode that it was set through the assignment type, apply and monitor or apply and autocorrect. So that's a good way that's like maybe the machine drifted and you want total control over when it's going to happen. If you went through all those steps and you disabled enforcement, you didn't automatically trigger a remediation task, or maybe you're doing this outside of policy completely, like I mentioned, and just creating guest assignments on your own, and then like, oh, it's Saturday at 4 p.m. is our prescribed maintenance window, and we want to control remediation only happening then. You could orchestrate that on your own once you understand the properties from this document. And then I just put a table down here to try and make it a little bit more clear if you're using the different assignment types, and then if you're using the different enforcement modes, what your outcome is going to be. So now that you've got a good understanding of that, I would continue on. If you haven't read through these other conceptual documents, they're all a good place to start. But when you're ready to start working on your own configurations, these next step documents like setting up your dev environments and leading into creating and testing a package would be the next logical place. Thank you.